Hello and welcome to the Game Developer London podcast, a community of amazing people who love talking about and sharing their love of the details behind making games, whether or not they're actually based in London. I'm your host, I'm Oscar Clark, I'm he, him pronouns, and I'm on a quest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev but never dared to ask. And today I am delighted to be joined by Licia, and in fact I'm gonna bring her on screen now. He says, Licia, how you doing? It's lovely to see you.
Hello! Hi, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Cool. So, would you tell the audience who you are and what you do?
Hi, yeah, so I'm Licia Prehn, and I currently work as a player experience specialist at Next Games. I am also the leader of our diversity, inclusion, and belonging internal working group. But before that, I was a producer of mobile games in 3D animation, and I've been in the game industry now for about 6 years. I'm also an accessibility expert and advocate because I am a real life, live action blind person.
I love the way you put that. I'm a real life actor because it's we were talking about this earlier. It's like it's so rare for to people. You meet lots of people in the industry. Well, like not maybe lots, but you do meet a number of people in the industry who have various disabilities, including being blind. But being blind in a studio seems to be quite rare. Is that right?
I think it's pretty rare. I don't think I've ever actually, and I'm gonna kick myself in the foot if I'm forgetting someone really cool by saying this, but I don't think I've ever actually met another blind person who works at a studio.
Mm,
I've met a lot
mm,
of people, blind people who do game adjacent stuff and
mm,
stream and work in games in different like other ways, but it's very rare. I don't think I've ever met another blind person who's actually on a game dev team. So
mm.
it is pretty rare, even though there are people with other disabilities. Doing lots of really amazing things in the industry as well.
I
It's
see.
just we're few and far between, but when we find each other, it's always very exciting. Of course, I was on a panel for GA Conf a few weeks ago with some other people who do various things in games. I think that. I don't remember, was one of them also a developer of some kind,
Mm.
but it was so cool to be on a panel with just all blind and visually impaired people talking about, our struggles and what we go through with game, and it was amazing. It was super
No,
amazing.
exactly, and I think it's fascinating when you because there's a few people I know who've done a lot of this kind of like inclusion, particularly around usability areas. I know that something you're kind of doing accessibility stuff. It's not quite the same stuff, but I don't think. Oh, you tell me. But
Well,
uh,
we're
uh, uh,
neighbors.
we're neighbours, exactly. We're neighbours. I mean, it's so. I, I think this is a weird thing about games is where we forget how much we divide. What on earth is a game designer? What on earth is a UX designer? And
Exactly.
where does this? There's so many different variations of these things.
The line is
But when,
very drawn, or very, sorry, the line
no,
isn't so very drawn, I should
it's
say.
not
Like
so
it's,
very clear, is it?
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of blurring, a lot of people do many different things and wear many different hats. You're even wearing a hat now, it is what it is.
What would I be if I didn't wear this though on a stage? I mean, come on,
That is
you've
fair.
seen
That
me
is
enough.
fair.
So let's talk a little bit about your kind of like I mean, talk particularly about kind of the community aspect and the. I'm thinking if we start talking about the player end of things, then later let's come back and talk about the being in a studio, being part of the
Sure.
industry, and the kind of issues of that. In terms of where do you think we are in terms of paying attention to the needs of our players who aren't necessarily, you know, classic. I don't know what's the right phrase I should use.
I usually
For
just say sighted
yeah,
people when talking about
sighted
people.
people. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But it's not
I
just sighted. It's
Yeah,
hearing issues. It's
exactly. Yeah.
various other things like that. So
Yeah. So I think if I think about it from the perspective of 5 years ago, when I gave my first talk about being a blind gamer, not even
mm-hmm,
necessarily a blind person working in the industry, but a blind gamer. Um, and the responses I got to my first ever talk, and how those responses changed over the years, and the responses I see now, and the discussions I see now on LinkedIn and all the other people who suddenly do accessibility as their full-time job, I'd say we've done a total 180 in a very short amount of time. We went from someone like me who's a blind gamer not even knowing the word accessibility to, after DevCom last year, me getting spam LinkedIn messages from someone who didn't read my talk description clearly enough, trying to sell me accessibility testing. So,
mm-hmm.
um, yeah, we've come a long way.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
We've
trying
come
to.
a long way.
I try to think. I think it was a. I think it was a guy called Ian Hamilton. Who
Yes,
I
it is Ian
first.
Hamilton.
Yeah. I saw Ian do a talks. Actually, Vodafone at the time, mobile games. He was talking about relatively late noughties, I think it was.
Yeah,
He was doing some really interesting talks around bringing disabled groups together, and actually, even just things like colorblindness was an
yeah,
important thing. But
yeah.
he was trying to get people to think about contrast,
Yes.
various settings like that. I mean, is that the sort of thing that matters to you?
To an extent, and actually it's
Yeah.
funny you bring up Ian because Ian is the reason I'm here today,
Mm.
arguably,
Mm.
because I gave my first major talk at Aalto University here
Yeah.
in the Helsinki metropolitan area with Ian, and Ian was the one who kind of told me that there is a need for what I have to say
Yeah.
about this topic. So I love Ian and nothing but respect for Ian.
He's
But
been
back
amazing. I haven't seen him
back
in probably 5 years, maybe more. But he's a superb guy, and he's done an amazing job, I think, of championing this space and trying to prick the kind of egos of people like me to make sure we're paying attention. Because I can see perfectly in colour, but friends of mine can't see red and blue. I
yeah.
mean,
I'm sorry I didn't answer
yeah.
your question, by the way, about contrast.
No. But I mean, that was just an example.
Yeah. No, anytime there's an opportunity to say nice things about Ian Hamilton, I will take it. So
Yeah. So we need to find. I need to reach out to him and get him on here as well. So.
he's on Twitter. He's on Twitter. You
He
can find
is.
him
No,
there.
I've got him on everything. I need to say hello. It's been too long. But
Yeah.
so, what does matter? What should we be paying attention to? What are the kind of tricks?
So for someone with me and my vision,
Hmm.
I would say font size is super
Yeah.
important. Font size is essential. And then after font size and obviously general just kind of readability and that kind of UX stuff for those of us who have low vision, then we start talking about contrast, then we start talking
Yeah.
about how colors mix with each other.
Yeah.
I have my phone in dark mode, and I, like every other millennial ever, play Wordle. And having my phone's native dark mode with Wordle meant that it was almost impossible for me to see the wrong or the letters that I had that were in the wrong place. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
I turned on my phone's native high contrast mode. And it's been a game changer.
Yeah.
I can play Wordle so much easier now just because I'm not missing the really dark red on the black of my dark mode. So the contrast matters a lot.
Mm.
I feel bad. Sometimes I go to websites and I feel really bad for web designers because my phone settings just completely undo all the hard work they did. But I get the information I need from their website, so I guess that's what really matters.
Well, exactly. Also, you destroy my love of font. I want these really obscure, hard to read font. No,
Nope, can't have them.
Can't have them.
Can't have them. They're banned forever.
Ban them.
7 years dungeon.
Yeah, I've got so many font collections somewhere on storage. It's like ridiculous. I'm obsessed with these things. But actually, even though I love that kind of design stuff, the reality is that even any kind of example, I can't use any of those things for anything I'm trying to communicate, even to people. Just because, even if you're not visually impaired, you've got some factor that is going to get in the way. The movement,
Yeah.
the fact that
The sun,
you're in
the
bright
sun
light,
coming through the
sun.
window. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that I think a lot of people who are thinking about accessibility, this is not just about finding a way to support a small class of people. This
No,
is
it's
actually about
everyone.
everyone.
Everyone. Yeah, it's
So,
everyone, especially mobile games. I think this is
mm,
extra important. Obviously, for PC and console, it matters as well,
mm,
because more and more people are turning to PC and console games. But everyone plays mobile games.
yeah,
All
everyone.
kinds of people,
Yeah,
just from young to old. Everyone has a mobile game that they like,
yeah,
even if it is only Wordle. And just understanding how your game works when someone is playing it on a sunny bus. Uh,
Oh,
it's such a
seriously, yeah.
basic thing, but it's because that's when people pick up their phones often. Of course, there are also like hardcore mobile games where you spend lots of time, but a lot of people they have their phone for a few minutes to do a thing to pass time while they're waiting for another thing.
Yeah,
And you have to think about where they are in those situations and how easy your game is to use for everybody in that situation. And everyone can
exactly.
be inconvenienced by sunlight in their face. Everyone can be inconvenienced by the opposite, too dim lighting
Yeah.
or just a small screen or
Or
whatever.
just the fact that I've got to take my glasses off to read because
Yeah,
I'm extremely short sighted. So, I'm
exactly.
either holding my phone out here or I'm going to.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that's just being old.
It comes to you though, and
Yeah.
this is something that I learned from Ian actually that
Oh,
I've
yeah.
also incorporated into my own talks.
Oh,
Ian taught, he didn't teach me, but I learned from Ian to always ask from people
yeah.
if they plan on stopping playing all games when they turn 65. And almost no one says no,
No,
because at 65, the odds that you will have some kind of health condition that would impact your ability to play games increase like exponentially.
yeah.
So you are not building things for other people. You're actually future proofing your own things for yourself.
I'm just going to buy bigger screens. That's it, just bigger screens.
Bigger screens, yeah.
Fortunately, they're exponentially growing every time I see a
It's
new
true.
television set. Yeah.
I love how we went from trying to make the smallest of everything, the smallest
Yeah.
cell phone, the smallest whatever, and now it's just everything is getting bigger and bigger again.
Totally with that. Totally with that. So, what else? When obviously we talk about accessibility, but I think it's more than that, isn't it? Because I feel like it's more about understanding and engaging with people authentically,
Yes.
and that is partly about the way the device and looks. So I think it's also about finding where people are and what they're interested in and what's real to them. How
Yes.
does that fit into your kind of way of looking at, particularly with the sort of now you're doing this role around player accessibility? How does that fit into the piece as well?
Well, I think for any marginalized group, whether it's disabled people
Hmm.
or LGBTQIA plus people,
Yeah.
it is Pride Month, any kind of group of people.
In fact, it's
Uh,
Pride Day today. We were as of recording, so well,
yes!
first
Yeah,
it's the first day of June, so we were
I'm
currently
very
recording
happy.
on. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
it's nice. I think for any marginalized group, when we're talking about
yeah.
issues that impact that community, um, it's always better to talk about those issues with someone who understands what they are.
Yes,
So, when you are a community manager talking to a disabled player about the issues they face, you can have, I would say, a much more genuine conversation with them. And I
yeah,
think in a lot of ways, the player feels a lot more safe um, opening up and expressing how they feel compared
yes.
to a faceless developer who they don't know, is this person getting it or are they just putting my feedback into a Google sheet somewhere and leaving it to die?
Oh no! Oh, wound. That's such a wounding thing, isn't it? Thinking about that. What always comes back to me on this is so one of the charities I particularly fan of is a charity called Special Effect. I'm an ambassador for them, which basically means I like to talk about them a lot, and
Yes.
they're kind enough to put my name on their list of people who like talking about them a lot. Um, but the reason I like them so much is because of the what they're showing that games do about when you find ways to make sure that they're playable by people, they can actually create a level, a different kind of engagement. So, for example, one story I love is about the I've forgotten the full details, but basically, parent and child couldn't play football anymore, but now can play FIFA together.
Yes.
So their conversation is no longer about the disability or the kind of injuries or the accidents or whatever it was that caused it. I can't remember the details, but it's about FIFA
Exactly. And what they can do together.
and what they
Yeah,
do together.
precisely. I always, when I'm giving lectures on this topic, I always bring up the fact that, games are nowadays just as much part of the cultural zeitgeist as
Yes.
music, as films or whatever. And I remember what it was like being a kid if you didn't not really a kid, like a teenager, and there's a
Yeah.
new Spider-Man movie, new whatever movie coming out, and I didn't go because I have a really hard time in movie theaters, and I always
Yeah.
felt so left out
I
on
bet.
Monday when everybody went back to school and was talking about the new movie, how
Hmm.
cool it was, who they saw at the movie theater, like, all these cultural experiences. And now young people today are having that with games.
Yes.
So if you're, a young gamer who can't play, Fortnite or I guess Diablo or like Valheim. I can't play Valheim and I'm so bummed. I'm in my 30s and I'm sad and I feel left out because I can't play with my boyfriend. Like
Oh no.
no, but
Yeah.
like really, like when you can't play the games that all of your friends are playing, it's such a bummer because you just feel like you're missing out on something. You feel even more isolated, and people with disabilities in general are often quite isolated and marginalized from society. So
Hmm.
when you give us a chance to actually play something with our other friends who are not disabled, um, you give us a means to connect and feel like we're part of something and be part of a community, and that's essential for well-being, for mental health, for everything.
Absolutely.
That's the difference between being happy and being miserable.
Yeah, and that sense of competence, which is what I think. I mean, I look at games as that it gives a sense of competence, it gives a sense of anticipation, it gets a sense of
Yeah,
completion. Self-esteem is a factor that comes out of that sort of social engagement and social
yeah,
capital, and that applies to everybody. And there's no reason why we should be creating barriers to prevent
exactly,
people from doing it, which only
exactly.
need a bit of attention. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some play mechanics where it becomes a little harder to play with certain things. I
Of
understand that,
course, of
but
course,
that's
yeah.
not the same as ignoring it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you'll be surprised just to find out just how understanding, especially
Yeah.
I think low vision people are.
Mm.
I don't expect that I'm going to be able to play every game ever made ever.
No.
But an attempt could be made.
An attempt was made. This is the
Yes,
important thing. Yeah.
an attempt could be made,
Yeah.
and I'm always open to try things. But for me, it's always super awkward. And I remember back when I was doing the conference scene more and more. I haven't been to a conference since God knows when.
Wow.
But when I was doing the conference scene more and more, I'd quite often, after my talks, get people to come up to me and be like, "Oh, can you test our game? Yeah, we
Hmm.
want to know if it's accessible or not." And I'll be like, "Yeah, okay, I'll play your game." And then it was very rare that I actually got to play more than like 2 seconds of someone's game, and then it just got awkward.
Yeah. It's broken.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, sorry to say, but maybe accessibility could have been thought of. And the sad part was, by the time they would have these playable prototypes that they were bringing to conferences, a lot of these studios were already so far into the development process
Yeah.
that going back to square one to only now think about accessibility features, unless they were like minor tweaks, would have often just been difficult. And this
But
is why it's so important to think about inclusion and accessibility in the very early stages of even deciding what kind of game you're making.
yeah, exactly.
Because when you think about it from that point on, it becomes a lot easier because it's just part of the design.
No, completely. And I mean, I'm sure I fail at this all the time. But what I think this really hints at, and again, we said we'd come back to this, is like why we need to make sure that we have inclusive spaces to work in.
Yes, exactly.
Because, you know, if you just hire people that look like you end up, well, look like me, you end up with very bland, very white, very cis white male environments. And that's not a reflection of our audience, particularly as you said. Mobile in particular is everybody, but even PC is increasingly everybody.
Exactly.
Um, so, you know, what has your journey been like with? I mean, with working in studios? Having someone like Ian saying to you, "We need more people like you." Um, you know, has that been seamless and easy and without any hassle?
So it's interesting
Yeah,
because I've spoken to a lot of non-men. I spend a lot of time with non-men in the industry.
yeah,
And I think when I talk to other non-men and hear about their uh, journeys and what they've gone through, I feel like I've had it relatively easy.
yeah. Okay.
And I don't know why that is. Maybe I'm just that cool. No, I'm kidding. But like I've never had kind of big problems with being taken seriously.
Okay.
Of course, I have been blown off. Like, I have had awkward conversations. I've
Yeah.
had moments where it's just been like, oh my God. But I would say in employment situations, in studios where I've actually worked, when I've brought up these topics to my colleagues and my teammates, I've only had really good responses. Like,
Mm.
the awkward, weird stuff has happened at conferences. It's happened with people who, you know, were curious about the topic, but just didn't like the answers to the question, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I do.
So with people in my teams, I've worked at 2 game companies, and both of which have been pretty seamless in terms of just
Yeah.
being heard. And I'm very grateful. Uh, when I applied at Next Games, I had applied at 2 other studios before that. Actually, one
Yeah.
and a half, I should say. I had applied at one other studio. I got super far in the interview process, but they went with someone else. But they
Yeah.
liked me enough that they referred me to another company.
Oh, that's
And the
good.
other company was actually interviewing me when I got hired at Next.
Ah.
In all three situations, my accessibility expertise was actually very much valued, which I was terrified of, actually. I was terrified, as someone who had been openly critical of like everybody's games for the past 4 years when I was trying to find a new job, that like I would
Publicly
go and
critical. Yeah.
yeah, publicly critical of like everybody,
Yeah.
that when I was trying to find a new job, they'd be like, "Oh, okay." But no, that didn't happen. And of course, I don't know what kind of conversations happen behind closed doors, but apparently they couldn't have been that bad because I'm still employed.
No, exactly. But I mean, again, we talked about Next Games, and I'm a big fan of Timo and Sarah and the others at Next Games. But
Me too.
The thing I'm kind of thinking about is that you have been. I mean, we first met when I introduced you on stage.
Yes.
You are out there. You are
Yes.
upfront. You are not confrontational, because that's not a fair word. But
No.
you are willing to provoke a response.
No, I
And
ask
think
I
that's
ask
really
questions.
interesting. You do.
I ask
You do.
questions. I ask questions. I say what I think. I don't think
Yeah.
I'm confrontational. Actually, I
No. I was trying
no,
to
no, I
phrase
know
that.
you're not.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know. I'm just
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
like, I'm thinking about myself, like, the word I would use to describe myself. I don't think I'm confrontational. Actually, I think I could be, in a sense, more confrontational because I tend
Yes.
to avoid conflict. I am a bit of a pacifist, so I tend to avoid things that would be
Nothing wrong with that.
difficult.
Yeah.
Someone challenges me and I tend to be like, oh yeah, well, okay. Like I know when to pick my battles. When I was younger, I was much more like, "Grr!" But like I'm now in my 30s and I
Yeah.
can't. But no,
No.
I do put myself out there. I talk very openly about accessibility and my disability. I talk very
Yeah.
openly about my mental health. I talk very
Yeah.
openly about my sexuality and my gender.
Yeah.
All these things. It's important, I think, that I am open because and I actually wrote about this on LinkedIn today, when I was a teenager trying to kind of find myself and figure out the things that I like, who I wanted to be, what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of person I could be, I did not see anywhere someone that I wanted to be. I never had
I
an
was going there.
idol.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
never had an idol. I never had, and let me be clear, I should be no one's idol.
That's
But
not true.
I should be no one's idol. But I do hope that other people seeing me with all of the things about me that are taboo or different, seeing me be out there on stage, working, doing what I do, that they can look at themselves and be like, okay, they do that, I can do this.
Yes.
And we can have more people who maybe they don't think games is for them, like they're interested but they don't think it's for them, realize,
Yeah.
okay, maybe games actually are for me and I can apply for that school or apply for that internship or do that thing that I've been thinking of doing. Because I think that
Completely.
representation is super important. And I think if everywhere you look, you only see cis het men and also, to an extent, also only cis het women. Like
Yeah.
if your women in games representation is also just cis het white women, you still end up marginalizing quite a lot of people. It is better, but it's still marginalizing. You know what I mean?
No, completely. And this is one of the things I am very keen on trying to make sure that when we're pulling together kind of speakers for events, it's one of the biggest difficulties we have is trying to make sure we get good representation. And
Yeah.
the part of the trouble is that we have to find ways of getting people who can be there because of their expertise. Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who happen to be diverse. Great. And what happens if you happen to be from a more diverse background is it's actually more likely that you're going to feel less confident about speaking publicly.
Yeah.
Generally,
Yeah.
you're probably not going to have had the role models of somebody who stood there and seen yourself on stage as a result.
Exactly. Exactly.
In fact, speaking publicly is one of the biggest fears that people quote. You know, so
I
it is
can't
a
see
real
the
challenge.
audience. I can't
Yeah,
see the audience, so I've never had
yeah.
that.
No,
Um,
your superpower.
yeah, my superpower is blindness. No,
Yeah,
but yeah, but in that sense, I've never feared like public speaking per
yeah,
se. I've definitely feared not being taken seriously. Like I remember my
yeah.
first talk at PGC, I was like, oh my God, like I'm standing here in front of like CEOs and like designers and all these people who make real games. And all I have is these like silly little indie titles under my belt. And, you know, this kind of like thinking I don't measure up feeling. I don't want to say it's imposter syndrome because I don't have that. But it is sort of like, you know,
Heck,
feeling
I have
like
that.
no, but because I don't think imposter syndrome is
No,
necessarily
no, I
the
know what
thing
you're
because
saying. Yeah,
I do think I have done the things I've done.
yeah.
I don't think I'm role playing, you know, in any way.
No,
But
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it is sort of like in the beginning it did feel like, you know, that. But now that I've been doing it for, you know, I've been speaking and stuff for 5 years,
Mm,
um, I would say I'm very happy that I'm not boxed anymore.
yeah,
In the beginning, it did feel that when I got invited to talk at events, it was just accessibility. I remember I did one accessibility talk at one conference, and the
yeah.
next year I wrote to them again and I was like, hey, I'd love to come back. And their head of program was like, yeah, your talk last year was super popular. We really liked having you, but we're not going to have an accessibility track this year. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't say that I was gonna like that I wanted to talk about accessibility. Like,
Yeah.
so
Oh, but that's an easy trap that even I fall into myself sometimes. It's like, oh, that person could do that. We need someone to fill that hole. And you're the person that I think of immediately because you did that great job of that particular. It's an easy
yeah.
trap. It doesn't mean it's right, but it is an easy trap. But
No, yeah.
but again, I think if you're talking about the same one, I think I introduced you on. That was a great talk, and that was you going out there and provoking
Yeah.
in that positive, challenging way that you were describing. But I want to kind of continue that. So you have that kind of mindset, I think. I think you're showing it today as well. That is engaging. That is about asking questions. That is the sort of thing that provokes conversation. So when you're going into that first studio, and like you say, you sound like you had a great time with it. What were the things that the company who wants to bring more people like you into, more people from whatever diverse background elements they're talking about. It doesn't have to be about blindness. It doesn't have to be about LGBTQ. Blah 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 blah. It can be any number of particular angles. What considerations should people be paying attention to? What would you think would have mattered to you most when you started a role? You know, as a producer, as a accessibility, whatever the role. What were the things that really think make a difference?
Letting me be open about my disability or
Mm.
mental illness or whatever the challenge may be at my own pace.
Mm.
So I would say just not making a big deal about it, letting me start the conversation,
Yeah.
letting me, you know, bring up the issues. It is always amazing if someone from HR reaches out and is like, hey, I just wanted to make sure that you have everything you need. Done.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And if someone does make a mistake, say, I'm sorry, and then move on.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing that can happen is like someone does something that's accidentally ableist or exclusionary, and then they
Yeah.
spend 15 minutes apologizing, and I'm just awkwardly standing there like, bro, like, let's just like,
You're just
I'm not
making it
gonna,
worse. Stop
yeah,
digging.
I'm not gonna remember this tomorrow. Can we just stop now? Like, because what I end up remembering then is not the mistake, but the 15-minute apology.
Yeah.
So I would just let people. I don't want to compare blind people to cats, but like, you know, I'm a
Go
cat.
on. Yeah, cat's good.
So, yeah. So, you know, we'll come to you when we're kind of safe, when we feel safe enough to start being open. Otherwise, just let us do our job, and see us for what we're able to do and what we bring to the table. And don't, I mean, it's easy to say, like, don't have biases. It's like, yeah, okay. Like, wow, thanks for the advice. But like, really, you know, try if you find yourself being like, I don't know if I could work with a blind person. Challenge that thought. Why do
Yeah.
you think that? What makes you see a blind person and think they probably can't do this job. Why is that your first reaction?
Yeah.
It's really hard to have those conversations. It's the same thing with homophobia. I had this conversation earlier in the week with someone who, until they met me, had a really hard time with the concept of someone being non-binary. They didn't understand neo-pronouns. They didn't
Yeah.
understand anything. They were like, and their first reaction was anger. And I started being very open about, gender and things like this on LinkedIn a long time ago. And I didn't know this person back then. I've only recently met them, but they're like, they were so happy to meet me. I was kind of taken aback. It's so weird that people actually are excited to meet me, because like I don't get it. But he was he was really excited to meet me, and he's like, your LinkedIn posts completely changed my mind about gender.
Great.
And I was like, I should not have that much power. And if I do have this much power, how did that happen? but like it is.
But
it
thank
is true,
goodness, if it, in some way. I mean, I've got a lot of trans folks in my friendship base and family, and also non-binary as well. And I mean, I think in some ways, the amount of hate that's going on right now, particularly in UK and US around trans and non-binary issues, is appalling. Absolutely appalling.
But this goes back to what I was meaning, is that, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but like,
no, go for it.
People who feel that anger towards trans people or non-binary people or disabled people, I could never work with a trans person, for example. Why do you think that? Why do you think you could never work with a trans person? What, like, and when you start challenging yourself, like, with those difficult conversations and actually confronting that bias, that is when change happens. So, when I say don't be racist, don't be ableist, don't be transphobic, it does go deeper than that. And I think part of it is also admitting, and this is the hardest part, I would say, is admitting that you did something that is transphobic. Because having that rage is transphobia. Having that rage toward non-binary people and trans people is transphobia. Having that rage or confusion or anger toward disabled people is ableism. It doesn't make you a terrible person automatically, but it does mean that you are engaging in ableist behavior, and thus is ableism. And a lot of people can't handle hearing that, because their first reaction is, I'm not homophobic, I'm not ableist, and they think it's an attack on their character, and they don't realize it's an attack on their actions.
Yes, exactly. It's a difference between an action and a belief, almost.
Yes. Yes.
It's an interesting one. I think particularly when somebody is changing their pronouns, there is a period of time which I've noticed I struggle with, because basically I'm old and I forget.
Apologize and move on. Apologize and move on.
I was exactly what I was going to say. That's the thing, isn't it? It's knowing the apologize and move on thing. And the trouble is, if you are an ally, a poor allies, I know I don't mean it that way, but if you're an ally, you overthink it. It's quite easy to overthink, because you want to help, you want to do the right thing.
It's the same with disabled allies, though. It's the exact same.
I'm sure I fuck that up all the time.
But it's the same thing. It's the same thing with disabled allies. People who want to be allies to the disabled community. And sometimes they end up overcompensating or being too eager. For example, with providing help. If you see me struggling, you can ask, hey, do you want some help? And if I say yes, you can help me. But if I say no, fuck off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually,
I hope I'm allowed to curse.
No, I don't know if we are or not. I'm sure somebody will deal with that. I'll let the guys know. Hey, it was easily done. But I actually think, I vaguely remember when you were one of the Pocket Gamers, they put a little stage thing they put you on.
Yeah.
I think it was you. And I think you asked me to help you down.
Yes, I did.
I didn't offer, but I was sat there looking at you going, should I, shouldn't I? And you then asked me to
ask. You can always ask. I think that's the big thing. You can always say, can I help you? I think the issue then comes with if I say no, or if you don't ask. So you just assume that I need help. So it's the same thing, it's the same thing in working life. When you're working with a disabled person on a project or whatever, and if you just assume the help that I'm going to need in the situation, it's super rude. But if you ask me, hey, do you need help reading these slides? Do you need help, with this file or whatever, with the small like dots in this Excel or whatever? Like, that's, it's a reasonable question. And they'll be like, hey, thanks for
Yeah,
asking, but actually no, or hey, thanks for asking. Yes. Oh my God, please help me.
yeah.
So, it's just not making a big, like, to circle back to like the original question from like 15 minutes ago. uh, it's just about asking
Be a
and
reasonable
respect.
person.
Be reasonable and don't make a big deal about it. Don't
Yeah.
don't overthink it. Just let your coworkers exist.
And I think the more, I mean, I think on the issue kind of about dealing with homophobic behaviour, I think the more people are exposed, the less of that we see.
Exactly. Exactly.
At least I hope so. At least I hope so.
Exposure is actually the theme of this year's Helsinki Pride, and that's
Is
exactly
it?
what they mean. Yeah,
Yeah,
not to
that's
plug
good.
or anything, but it's the theme of this year's Helsinki Pride. The
Plug
whole Pride
away.
Month. Yeah, the whole
Yeah.
the whole Pride Month theme is exposure, and it's
Yeah.
because of exactly that. If you're exposed to people of different genders, different sexualities, different disabilities, different races, different whatever, just people who are different from you,
Yeah.
that exposure is going to make you smarter and wiser and more aware. You're going to learn. You're going to have sometimes uncomfortable conversations, and you might actually find out that some of the things you do aren't great things, but it doesn't make you a bad person, and it is an opportunity to learn. And I think
Yes.
that's the most important part.
But isn't there a kind of inherent contradiction or oxymoron in that process, particularly when we're dealing with trans or non-binary issues? Because a lot of people are stealth. They don't want to make a deal of it. They are their
Yeah.
gender. They do not need to explain their gender to other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And the fact is that means that some people will not understand that
Yeah.
that is an issue and that what that means, and that it's harder for again back to poor allies. But I mean, you know where I'm going. But it's I do find it very difficult. So I want to find ways of helping normalize. But the reality is, it's not my issue. I want to empower people who want to make that conversation, but it's no point. We can't invent it. We can't force it.
No. No.
It's not one of those
It
things.
it comes when people are ready, and I
Yeah.
think I think, as a non-binary person who is obviously nowadays open out, I
Yeah.
identify, if people ask me my gender, I just ask if Pepsi is okay. Like, are you a boy or a girl? Pepsi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Good. Like it.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I don't know. I don't know. But I think if someone just tells you, hey, my pronouns are insert pronouns here, okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to understand, but you do
Yeah.
have to respect people's humanity.
Yeah.
And if they say, hey, my name is this name now, you don't have to understand. And you might even make mistakes on both the name and the pronouns, but apologize, correct yourself, move on. And
I
that's it.
I think the one I find most challenging is people who insist on referring to somebody by their dead name,
Oh,
their
you should
previous
just
life by their dead name.
you should just go into that person's house and rearrange their silverware drawer and like wish them an eternally warm pillow. Like, I
Exactly. It's
I
like,
would say stronger things, but I don't want
yeah.
to.
No, no, exactly. Again, I mean, but this isn't just about obviously, obviously we want to make sure we have as accessible a space as possible. I think there's a general principle we were trying to get to is not really necessarily just about, your identity or your vision or
Yeah.
other sensory perceptions. This is about respecting human beings at a human level.
Yes.
I feel,
Yes.
regardless of what that is, and that's
Humans
not
make games.
human
People
make
make
games.
games.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a friend of mine was using a phrase. Basically, they were just referring to everyone as they're humans.
Yeah.
Which
That's what it is. Humans make
yeah,
games. Like, games do not magically manifest themselves out of the void and
yeah,
get onto your phone. They are made by teams of people who
and
all
there's
have
stories.
stories.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's
We
stories
said
that
the
we
same
share.
thing.
Yeah. Anyway, so you go on. But it is that thing, isn't it? Is that there's stories we share, and everybody is enriched
Yes.
when we enrich the story. And
Yes.
and to me, that's why it's so important to kind of like surround yourself by interesting people who have different views than yourself.
Exactly.
I'm not particularly keen on inviting people who are Trump supporters at the moment,
No.
but that's less about their views and more about their behaviours.
Yeah, and I think also there's sort of a line to be drawn.
Yeah,
Um, and people have argued with me about this, but like
yeah,
I I believe in freedom of speech, but not when your speech has the potential to actually cause legitimate harm.
yeah,
And I think in certain situations, if you're platforming people who
mm,
advocate things that directly impact people's well-beings, for example, limiting access to gender affirming care for trans people,
yeah,
or um, kind of pushing this idea that disabled people don't belong in the workplace, and things like that is actively
actively harmful.
harming
Yeah,
is actively harming people.
mm,
And I think your freedom of speech ends when my right to exist as a person begins to be infringed on. Do you get what
I
I mean?
totally agree. Totally agree. I think that's a good way to put it as well. Again, it's when your freedom of speech is impinging on someone's material existence.
Yeah. Like
Maybe the
I should not have to justify to you why I'm alive.
Yeah, exactly
And
right.
that's
Yeah.
it.
So let's cover the other angle, the third angle
Yes.
that you kind of referred to, the sort of mental health angle of it, because that's
Yeah.
again, it's a different slice, a different pie. I mean,
Yeah.
we the Yuki team have done a great job at introducing to a lot of games teams mental health first aider, which I think is a really good principle. We actually have in fundamental games we have a whole section on mental health in our employee guides and stuff like that. And I think mental health is something that's really, in particularly the UK, is very poorly supported by the NHS. Sadly,
Yeah.
maybe there are some amazing folks out there doing amazing things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody, but for example, ADHD is an extremely difficult thing to get support
Diagnose
for.
in Finland too. In Finland
Yeah,
too, it takes about half a year if you're lucky in the private sector. If you
it,
work for an amazing studio like Next,
yeah,
you get things done a bit faster. But if you're an adult, especially if you're not a man trying to get an ADHD diagnosis and ADHD, yeah, not
yeah.
ADHD care, it can be super difficult because even still now in modern society in Finland, there's this idea that ADHD is the little boy running around the classroom and
Yeah,
not the girl or not boy
yeah.
struggling to manage just in general. And that's super harmful. That's why stereotypes are super harmful.
Well, exactly.
um
And also, if you go onto the ASD side, so the spectrum side of things,
yeah,
particularly with women, the symptoms are different and have
yeah, they
not
are.
been understood properly.
And we're
Are they do?
fetishized. We're
Yeah,
fetishized. Like,
yeah,
you know, uh, this whole manic pixie dream girl thing,
yeah,
if you watch every movie ever, a
mm,
lot of the women in those films, like if you met them in real life, are actually, on the spectrum or
yeah,
on some level neurodivergent and need support. And
yeah,
it's dangerous because what ends up happening is, people see those things portrayed in films and they think, oh, I want a quirky, nerdy
mm,
non-man in my life, and then they don't understand that a lot of those people actually struggle
yeah,
a lot,
yeah.
and their struggles are boiled down to them just being quirky and they're
Mm.
not seen as people. So this again goes back to
Treat humans
every
as humans.
yes, everyone being people.
Yeah. I think there's another angle to it as well because I think it's being aware of people's, particularly around energy, about
Yeah,
your personal energy.
spoons.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one for a while. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, that idea. The reason, sorry, the spoon thing is a particular technique which is really clever and really interesting.
I
Color
prefer
theory
HP.
is
I use HP now instead of
okay.
spoons because I found that if you
Well, I
tell
don't
people
know
I don't have enough
HP.
spoons, no, because it's the same thing as spoons. If you say to people that I don't have enough spoons,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
they're
yeah,
confused. I don't have the HP. I don't have the hit
yeah.
points. Everyone
Right.
understands that you need a potion or, to go to a cabin to rest or something. They get it immediately because we all make games, so we all know what HP means.
Well, another one I've heard used is colors. What color are you? Colour's
Is that
quite a good way of
is that like
expressing it as well.
synesthesia or?
Not really. It's more of an
Okay.
emotional description of your current state of mind.
Oh, okay. I don't know that
Um,
one.
it's quite a nice technique that I've seen. It's basically a good way of mapping where you've been.
Ah, okay.
If you
I have to look
associate
that
a
up.
certain mood with a colour, and you build a
Okay.
pattern of those colours, then you can keep a diary of what mood states you're in under certain circumstances. So it's really kind of useful, as opposed to the sort of
Oh,
like number of spoons. It's kind of like a well, the HP part is like you're guessing a kind of
yeah.
number,
Excuse
whereas
me.
this is attributing a kind of quality to
Right.
that.
That's
But
interesting.
the reason I mention that is because I mean I haven't got those particular issues. I mean, arguably I'm some element of ADHD as my family keep trying to tell me, um,
Mhm.
but I'm not diagnosed with anything particular. Probably a little tiny bit of depression occasionally,
Right.
but
It's normal though.
that's normal. That's human.
Mm.
But more of my point was more about like understanding people's energy changing. Like for example, if you're in social conditions,
Yeah.
somebody who's maybe on the spectrum might find that more draining than others.
Yes. Yes. And especially, having like different triggers, and of course the word triggered
Yes.
has been ruined, but just having different triggers, and it can take a while to kind of learn that.
Mm.
So for example, in my case, I don't have meltdowns, I do have shutdowns where I just
Yeah.
sort of like, I need to get out of that situation.
Mm.
And a lot of people don't understand that about me because I'm super social and whatever,
Yeah.
but that goes away when there's a lot of like, party noise doesn't necessarily bother me, but
Oh,
if it's just
interesting.
like, if it's like super loud noise, screaming kids on the tram, like
Yeah.
just noise I can't control, um, and crowds that aren't going anywhere. In those
Yeah.
situations, I will just shut down. So, at conferences, I tend to either come really early in the morning or really late
Mm.
because I avoid that mad rush of people. And I tend to avoid going, to places where I know there's going to be a lot of unknowns in that way.
Yeah.
So, it depends really on the person, and these things kind of manifest themselves in different ways, but like, I guess because of my vision, I'm very sensitive to noises and sounds, and I can get very easily overstimulated and overwhelmed by too much
Yeah.
sound, which a lot of people just don't believe because of how much time I spend at gigs, and but it's true. But it's a different kind of auditory experience when I'm focusing on a band
Yeah.
versus when I'm focusing on if I'm just in a loud chaotic environment like a super busy shopping mall where everyone's walking in different directions and there's screaming kids and yelling drunk people and
No, exactly. If there are people who have processing issues who find that kind of that noise of movement and
yeah.
sound and visual stimulus
Yeah,
can
too
be
much. It's
oppressive
too
and too
too
much,
much.
and
Yeah,
they
it's
need to
pain.
get
It's
away from
physically
that.
pain. It's physically painful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's again. I think the reason I'm mentioning all this stuff is I think it's important when we're looking about accessibility in general, and also how we engage diverse people into groups. Paying attention to those consequences of when you have different people with different needs, different physical, different stimulus sensitivities, different sensibilities, being just giving people a bit of a break. To be honest, is that a reasonable way to put it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'm delighted to chat to you. Thank you very much for volunteering to do this with me.
Thank you for
Um,
having me.
Anything you'd like to leave the listeners, with in terms of, what's the sort of like one thing that you wish more game devs considered? Um, you know, Not just for accessibility reasons, but from your experience as a producer, as somebody who's done accessibility, who's done a whole bunch of areas of really interesting game dev. What's the sort of thing that you think people should take away from this conversation?
Don't be afraid of diversity. Don't be afraid of having different kinds of people on your team. There are a lot of people out there who do silly things in the name of diversity, in the name of like women in games or whatever.
Yeah,
And, mistakes have been made in the past. Um, but people have learned from those mistakes. And you'll find that kind of the people who want to spoil the fun for everyone else tend to get bored and go away after a while. I'm maybe a bit too much of an optimist, but I do think that the good people and good in general always wins out. And I think that we're really having now a reckoning where we've come from this BuzzFeed feminism of the last 10 years, where it was like talking about man spreading, to talking about things that actually matter,
Yeah.
like accessibility, like intersectionality, like these things that impact people's livelihoods and wills to live, not just, you know random things on the internet that one person is offended by suddenly becoming the whole zeitgeist for 3 months, and having the whole name of the movement being ruined by one bad faith actor or bad faith argument. I would just
Yeah.
say, don't fear that, don't be controlled by that, don't fall for that.
Yeah, exactly. Be human.
Yes, be human.
And let's embrace the human. I think I've got a title there. Don't be afraid of disability. I think that'll do nicely.
Yes.
Alicia, thank you so much for that. And if people wanted to get hold of you or talk to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I do check Twitter if I get notifications. So MC Licia P on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as Licia Prehn as well. You can find me there. And yeah, I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's been an absolute delight, and
Thank you
I
so
missed
much.
you. Hopefully, I'll
I
see you
miss you too.
soon.
Yes,
It's been
hopefully.
it's been way too long, obviously
Yes.
pandemic wise and all that
Welcome
jazz.
to Helsinki.
Well, yeah, I can't wait. I'm hopefully you're going to be coming in at the end of the year, so I will
Yay!
hopefully see you then. So,
Yay!
on that note, though, I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'm going to close up by saying this has been your Game Dev London podcast. I've been delighted to talk to Alicia about all sorts of things about being human, and if you want to find out more about this sort of stuff, then you can feel free to search up and talk to us and reach out. In particular, if you've liked this, if you enjoyed this, please do the usual, like, subscribe, or whatever it is that you do on your various tools of podcasting or YouTubing or various other things. So please, join us. And also, there's a massive group of people who love making games on Discord as well. So check out Game Dev London. And this has been your podcast. Thank you very much for staying with us.